On Plugged In, immigration and the challenges facing the Biden administration.
So what we're doing now is attempting to rebuild the system that can accommodate what is happening today.
With a shift in government policy, a surge of migrants and asylum seekers seek to come to America through the U.S. Mexico border.
Immigration policy affects our national security, it affects our economy, it affects families, it affects the very nature of who we are as a country and as a people.
The legal, political, and economic impact of American immigration. On Plugged In, crossing the U.S. border. Hello and welcome to Plugged In. I'm Greta Van Susteren, reporting from Washington, D.C. Immigration has been a controversial issue in American politics for more than a generation. It is nearly 35 years since President Ronald Reagan signed the last comprehensive immigration reform legislation passed by Congress. Now, 3 months into his term, President Joe Biden is facing an immigration challenge. At the U.S. Mexico border, there is a surge of thousands of migrants. Many of them are unaccompanied children. In a few minutes, we will examine the situation at the U.S. southern border. But first, to the U.S. Congress and two key elements of Biden's immigration agenda clearing the first hurdle. VOA's congressional correspondent, Katherine Gibson, reports.
Growing numbers of asylum seekers and unaccompanied minors are arriving along the U.S. Mexico border, prompting the Biden administration to offer assurances that the nation's often dysfunctional immigration system is under control.
The vast majority of people, vast majority who come to the border are turned away. The border is not open. These are very limited scenarios.
Congressional Republicans say Biden's campaign promise to legalize 11 million undocumented immigrants already in this country is encouraging more people to come.
That's why you'd put your whole family together and make this trek. Because you just listened to what President Biden said.
The number of migrants crossing into the U.S. is rising, according to the Department of Homeland Security. The Senate's top Republican calls these numbers a crisis.
It's a security crisis as well. New reporting suggests multiple people arrested at the border in recent months have matched to names on the FBI's terrorist watch list.
Migrants now crossing the border would not be impacted by legislation if it passes Congress, but the initiative could alter the politics of immigration in Washington.
It gives those who are opposed to immigration changes a hook to hang on and to be criticizing the administration. So it really narrows or complicates the political space that's there for the Biden administration to move on these legislative proposals.
House Democrats passed two narrower proposals Thursday that would legalize some foreign-born farm workers, as well as the so-called dreamers, undocumented immigrants brought to the U.S. as children.
If we ever close the door to new Americans, our leadership in the world would be lost. It has always been a pleasure for me to sing the praises of our dreamers. They make us so proud.
A strategy meant to win Republican votes in a U.S. Senate narrowly controlled by Democrats.
Those are populations that have been appealing across the board, and there's very strong public support, particularly for the DACA population, which would be the Dream Promise Act. But it's also the case that they are limited populations.
If those bills become law, up to 2 million dreamers would be put on a path to U.S. citizenship. Katherine Gibson, VOA News, Washington.
Since President Biden's January 20th inauguration, thousands of asylum seekers have been allowed to enter the United States. Under former President Trump, asylum seekers had to remain in Mexico while their asylum claims were processed. But President Biden reversed the Trump policy, and now asylum seekers are allowed to enter the United States while their asylum claims are being processed. VOA's Celia Mendoza is covering the story at the U.S. border with Mexico. I asked her about the challenges posed by the increasing number of migrants.
I am in Reynosa, Mexico, just few steps from the end of the bridge that connects the state of Tamaulipas in Mexico and Texas in McAllen, the Rio Grande Valley, where we have seen an increase in the number of crossings by people coming from Central America and other places. They didn't know that the border was closed. They thought that they were going to be able to stay in the United States and end up going to family members or other people that they have relationship with. But to their surprise, according to them, they were returned, and basically they don't have any other place to go. So they're spending their nights. As you can see behind me, it's a makeshift camp. People are sleeping here. We see some of the authorities that are patrolling the area, trying to make sure that they're safe. We have to remember this is an area that has a large presence of the cartels, and people are concerned that their children or their family members may be taken by them. Definitely, they have seen an overwhelming amount of people. We just this morning encountered a group that were trying to escape the authorities, groups of 50, 60, 100 people crossing. That means that they don't have enough resources at the border. The Department of Homeland Security has said that they're mobilizing agents from different locations and other borders of the United States, even coastal areas. And one of the main reasons, according to the authorities, of the lack of possibility to manage people as quickly is also because of COVID-19. The coronavirus has generated more strengths and more problems for the authorities because they now have to verify people, make sure that they don't have the virus, make sure that they can isolate them. But that has been very challenging, as we have seen in the images coming from the processing center in Donna, Texas.
We've had surges of people coming into the United States from that border during President Obama's presidency, and also during President Trump's presidency, and now during President Biden. Why are they coming now?
Many of them are angry towards their government. They believe that they have not provided them. Some of them are escaping security issues, personal threats, but the majority of the people we spoke believed that the border was open. They said that after President Biden won, the message they heard, and that's one of the things that I want to emphasize through Facebook and social media and postings, not through the actual media, is that the border was open and they were able to come to the United States because President Biden was going to give asylum to people, which is not true.
There are some adults who are coming. Some adults are coming with children, and then some children under the age of 18 are coming without adults. Those are unaccompanied minors. So how is the U.S. government looking at those three categories?
As far as we know, according to the government of the United States, only unaccompanied minors will be allowed to stay in the United States and follow the process to be able to go into the Health and Human Services system and eventually to be placed with their family members in the United States, or a foster family. If they don't have a suitable person, they will take care of them. But families, units, and also single adults will be returned to Mexico. According to the administration, we have seen that at least during the past few weeks, the number has been growing, especially those that are now in Mexico. Part of those are the ones that we spoke just this morning here in this park.
In the ones who are seeking asylum in the United States under the Trump presidency is that you had to stay in Mexico while your asylum proceedings was pending. But under the Biden administration, you get to stay in the United States while your asylum proceedings are pending?
That's right. However, this is something that the administration is trying to balance. One is to stop the MPP program, which is the Remain in Mexico program. It's about 25,000 people that were active in that system that are now being moved from Mexico to the United States. That is a process that is assisted by the United Nations, especially through the OEM, as well as other international agencies. And that is something that is structured with the government. Now, for those that are looking for asylum right now and don't have a process, the administration are telling them to wait in their countries. They're trying to figure out a way because the border under the Title 42nd is closed. And that means that whomever comes to the border, even if they have a valid case, will be returned because the border is not open.
Thank you very much for joining me. Good luck.
Thank you, Greta.
The U.S. Department of Defense has approved a plan to house unaccompanied migrant children at a U.S. military base in the state of California. U.S. authorities say that in the month of February, 9,000 unaccompanied children were encountered at the U.S. Mexico border. President Biden has also promised to reunite hundreds of migrant parents with their children who are currently in U.S. custody. Many of those parents were sent back to their home countries, making reunification more difficult. VOA's Alini Barrows reports.
Like thousands of migrants, Luis left Guatemala with his teenage son in May 2018 to escape local gangs, trekking more than 2,000 kilometers to the U.S. Mexico border.
I encountered Border Patrol officers who took me and my son. They told me my child had to be separated from me because I was going to criminal detention.
Luis is not his real name, and VOA agreed to protect his identity.
Officials told me, you can't ask anything. If you ask questions, we're going to file more charges against you.
Luis and his son arrived at a time when the administration of former President Donald Trump had declared a zero-tolerance policy for immigrants found illegally crossing the border. Luis' son joined thousands of migrant children, some just toddlers, kept in holding facilities.
I don't want children taken away from parents. And when you prosecute the parents for coming in illegally, which should happen, you have to take the children away.
It was torture what they did to us.
Luis was deported to Guatemala. His son stayed in custody until a relative living in the U.S. became his guardian. Today, hundreds of migrant children remain separated from their parents, a situation President Joe Biden has promised to remedy.
We're going to work to undo the moral and national shame of the previous administration that literally, not figuratively, ripped children from the arms of their families, their mothers and fathers at the border.
The Biden administration created a family reunification task force. But finding deported parents is a daunting task, according to an American lawyer fighting to reunite families.
We are looking for the Biden administration to do a few very specific things. The first is to help us find the remaining 500 families, and that means giving us whatever contact information they have. The second is for the Biden administration to allow parents to return to the United States to reunify with their children. Some of those children are very young and have been away from their parents for years now.
The ultimate solution, according to immigration lawyers, is to grant legal status so reunited families can remain in the United States. The Biden administration says it is open to the idea.
If, in fact, they seek to reunite here in the United States, we will explore lawful pathways for them to remain in the United States.
Meanwhile, the work of finding deported parents continues with the help of nonprofits scouring remote areas across Central America.
Many times we obtain more information from records of the people here in Guatemala through birth certificates, and we can see where the parents are from. In other cases, we have to go to the community leaders and try to ask if they know a certain person.
More than 5,000 families were separated at the U.S. Mexico border. Parents of 105 children were found in February. Luis and his son were reunited in the U.S., but the search continues for the parents of some 500 children. Alini Barrows, VOA News, Washington.
It's not just migrants from Latin America making the dangerous journey to the United States border. More than 1,600 people representing 36 countries across Africa were recently apprehended at one section of the border. VOA's Elizabeth Lee has the story of one Haitian woman's harrowing journey.
For many migrants, getting to the land of opportunity is a dangerous journey. But for Muzmi Altido, an asylum seeker from Haiti, the situation in her home country was worse.
2 robbers attacked me. They beat me. They stabbed me.
She says she almost died. Unable to support her 3 children, Altido left them with her mother and traveled to Belize to find work, and eventually ended up joining a caravan to walk to the United States while pregnant.
I didn't see a life there. I only saw death. So instead of dying, I took the road.
When Altido arrived in Mexico, she was left behind. She made it to the border only through the help of strangers and was allowed to enter the U.S.
They were not going to hold me because I was pregnant.
In the U.S., Altido, her now 18-month-old baby, and approximately 60 other Haitian migrants live in temporary housing provided by the Catholic Charities Diocese of San Diego while they wait for their immigration court hearings. But they are the exception, says Gulin Joseph of Haitian Bridge Alliance, a nonprofit community organization.
Yes, in February alone, we had over 1,000 people who got deported. And sometimes it would be one deportation flight, and we also saw up to 3 deportation flights in one day. And as I mentioned, in those flights, we saw pregnant women, 26 weeks pregnant women. We saw infants as young as 1 and 2 months old.
Joseph says this is not the time to deport Haitians when their home country is currently experiencing political unrest after an alleged failed coup.
We are demanding the Biden administration to stop the deportation and expulsion.
The Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, has not responded to VOA's request for a comment about deportations of asylum seekers from Haiti. But DHS Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas is asking all asylum seekers to wait as the Biden administration revises former President Donald Trump's immigration policy during a pandemic.
If families come, if single adults come to the border, we are obligated to, in the service of public health, including the health of the very people who are thinking of coming, to impose the travel restrictions.
Meaning deportations. However, there are reports of inconsistent treatment of migrants.
We are hearing across the border, not only in San Diego, in McAllen, Texas, and other places, that people are getting processed and let in, and some of the same Haitian group who are coming through are deported.
Even for Altidore, who is allowed to enter, her future is far from certain, as her fate will be decided by an immigration court. Elizabeth Lee, VOA News.
Since taking office, President Biden has reversed several of his predecessor, President Trump's immigration policies. That includes halting construction of the border wall to reuniting separated families. Biden also put Vice President Kamala Harris in charge of immigration issues. On March 25th, President Biden addressed this topic and laid out his plan to stabilize the border.
The way to deal with this problem, and I started to deal with it back when I was United States Vice President, putting together a bipartisan plan of over $700 million to do with the root causes of why people are leaving. What did Trump do? He eliminated that funding. He didn't use it. He didn't do it. And in addition to that, what he did, he dismantled all the elements that exist to deal with what had been a problem and has been continued to be a problem for a long time. So we're building back up the capacity that should have been maintained and built upon that Trump dismantled. It's going to take time. So what we're doing now is attempting to rebuild the system that can accommodate what is happening today. The idea that I'm going to say, which I would never do, if an unaccompanied child ends up at the border, we're just going to let them starve to death and stay on the other side. No previous administration did that either, except Trump. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it. That's why I've asked the Vice President of the United States yesterday to be the lead person on dealing with, focusing on the fundamental reasons why people leave Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador in the first place. Rolling back the policies of remain in Mexico, sitting on the edge of the Rio Grande in a muddy circumstance with not enough to eat. I make no apologies for that. I make no apologies for ending programs that did not exist before Trump became president, that have an incredibly negative impact on the law, international law, as well as on human dignity. And so I make no apologies for that.
Implementing changes to immigration and asylum policies has challenges, both politically and legally. Alberto Gonzales led the U.S. Justice Department as Attorney General under President George W. Bush. He is now the Dean of Belmont University College of Law in Nashville, Tennessee. I asked him about implementing changes to immigration and asylum policies.
It's extremely difficult, Greta. The proof of that is the fact that we've not been able to solve this problem for decades because immigration policy affects our national security, it affects our economy, it affects families, it affects the very nature of who we are as a country and as a people.
In 2014, there was a surge during President Obama's administration. Again, 2019, there was another surge of people coming in during President Trump's administration. Now, 2021, we have the same thing with President Biden. The numbers are, though, bigger. Any sort of thought about why the numbers seem to be bigger right now?
It could be a number of factors. One, it could be the perception outside our borders about the fact that there's greater opportunity to come to America, to be allowed to come to America and to pursue a better life. It could be that we have worse conditions in Mexico and Central America. You know, the reason that people come into this country, certainly unlawfully, is because they're avoiding persecution. They want, they're seeking a better life. I know as a father, what wouldn't I do to try to provide my family, to my sons and daughters, an opportunity for a better life? And so I think those are the reasons why I think people are coming here to America.
You know, we always think in this country about immigration with our southern border, but there are a lot of people who come into this country on visas through our international airports and overstay the visas. And then, of course, they're in violation of our law. You have any sort of sense of how big a problem that is?
I can't tell you, it's been a while since I've looked at the numbers, but I know that in looking at this 5 or 10 years ago, we identified this as a component of a comprehensive plan, and that is to revise our visa process. You're right, we have people that come into this country on a work visa. We also have a lot of people that come into this country on a student visa, and they come here, they graduate, and then they disappear in our society, or they come into this country. The employer doesn't do a very good job of monitoring, where the employee goes after they're no longer employed.
And you think of the problem that many young people have in this country is that they came to the United States with their parents when they were young, not knowing that they had come here illegally, and then they grow up and when they turn 18 or something, apply for a job, they find out they're here in the country illegally and they risk deportation. And we've had a lot of sort of Band-Aid efforts calling them Dreamers or DACA, and we've tried to sort of paste together a solution, but even that doesn't offer much certainty to those people.
No, and there's no question about it. And I'm somewhat sympathetic to these individuals. They came into this country through no fault of their own. This is the only country they've ever known. They've grown up here. They've been educated here. And, I'm sympathetic to that. Now, obviously, there's got to be a way to make it right for those who have followed the rules and are living outside our borders and are waiting to come into this country lawfully. So, but I, as a general matter, am sympathetic to those who were brought here by their parents. And again, they didn't make the conscious choice of coming to this country unlawfully.
What do we do about unaccompanied minors?
I don't know if there is a good resolution, Greta. We can't send them back. They're minors. I think we have a moral obligation to provide for them to some degree. Long term, I just don't know. I think this is the thing that's really presented a serious issue for the current administration. Again, you can't send them back. I think we have to find some kind of solution. One thing we could do perhaps is work with the home governments and see if we can provide some kind of inducement, some kind of additional aid to them to help care for these minors as we turn them back to their home countries. But I think we have a responsibility to make sure that whatever happens next, that they're placed in a situation where they're not going to be harmed. After that, we can't account for what happens. But right now, once they're in our custody, we have an obligation as to what happens next is to ensure that they're placed in a safe situation.
There's a natural border in some areas, like we have the Rio Grande River that separates part of Mexico from the United States. And then President Trump built a wall. Was starting to build a wall. Much of it is completed, but highly controversial in this country. Was the wall something a good idea? Should it be completed, or was that just a bad idea?
I've never been a fan of the wall, Greta. I've always now don't get me wrong. I believe in secure borders, and I believe that's a top priority for our government. But I think there are more effective ways to secure our southern border than spending the money that it would take to complete our border along the entire, southern border. And I'm talking about greater use of technology, relying upon the natural terrain, more border agents. And so I think there are other ways to secure our border. I think it just sends a better message than simply building a wall. As President Bush, George W. Bush used to say, you don't build a fence between your neighbor and yourself. That just sends the wrong message. I think we all understand that part of our success in this country depends upon the success of Mexico. And so we need to be working together to solve these kind of problems.
Judge, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
We mentioned earlier that President Joe Biden ordered a pause in border wall construction. Construction of a wall on the southern border of the United States was a key part of former President Donald Trump's immigration agenda. The wall has some supporters and some detractors. Now the border wall is creating an environmental controversy. Reporter Megan Janetsky is in southern Arizona and tells us more.
The San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge is usually a place where the only sounds are desert winds and the trickling of water in rivers and ponds. However, in recent months, government contractors worked day and night to rapidly build barriers in remote, federally controlled lands like these. Now, as President Joe Biden pledges to halt wall construction, scientists like Miles Trapphagen worry damage has already been done to native species. The refuge is tucked in the far reaches of the desert, which sees little human migration.
This is a migratory corridor for wildlife, and it has been for thousands of years. And a lot of animals follow drainages like this. It's an obvious thing to do in the desert.
Surrounding mountains and valleys, known as the Sky Islands, are critical land where mountain lion, javelina, bobcat, North American jaguar, and other species migrate across the border. Trapphagen has worked as a biologist here since 1996, using motion sensor cameras to track animal migration. After wall construction got underway, he says the animals all but disappeared.
But since the border wall has been built, you have a 30-foot steel wall with gaps of only 4 inches wide between the steel bollards, and that's what they call the beams, is a bollard. So basically nothing larger than a cottontail rabbit could pass through the wall now. It's a huge impedance to all wildlife movement.
The Trump administration built more than 720 kilometers or 450 miles of wall, much of it on federal land to avoid legal battles from private landowners. Officials waived regulations like the Endangered Species Act under a 2005 law allowing them to build on protected land like San Bernardino. In his final days in office, Trump visited the wall near McAllen, Texas.
Today we celebrate an extraordinary milestone, the completion of the promised 450 miles of border wall, 450 miles. Nobody realizes how big that is.
By focusing on federal lands, environmentalists say construction has had an outsized impact on vulnerable species. Builders also drained the local groundwater to mix wall concrete, drying out natural habitat for 4 threatened and endangered fish species. 10 miles away in Guadalupe Canyon, John Kirk, an activist and wildlife photographer, says wall crews already blasted through the mountains with dynamite, destroying critical habitat for the last remaining wild jaguars in the United States. Although President Biden ordered an immediate pause on construction, some environmentalists want him to go further and take down the existing walls.
That gives some hope to the animals that are in places where there is no barrier right now. Now, areas such as San Bernardino, this area, Coronado National Forest, Coronado National Monument, those are areas that ultimately we need to have those sections of wall taken down.
The Biden administration says it expects to develop a plan to address what to do with the border wall construction in the next 2 months. Megan Janetsky for VOA News, the San Bernardino National Wildlife Refuge, Arizona.
That's all the time we have for now. My thanks to former U.S. Attorney General Alberto Gonzales and to VOA's Celia Mendoza reporting from the U.S. Mexico border. Stay up to date on the latest news at voanews.com and follow me on Twitter @Greta. Thank you for being plugged in.